Hey guys, welcome back to Fantasy Tip. My name is Julian, and in today's episode, we're going to be continuing the series of episodes that we've been making about each individual NHL team, talking about their lines, talking about their noteworthy players, and if I think you should consider drafting those players. We've been going in alphabetical order, and we're getting close to the end. This is the sixth to last video. We're going to be talking about the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, before we get started on the Toronto Maple Leafs, please leave a like, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell. And if you do want to take your support to the next level, the link to my Patreon is down in the description. Now, the Leafs are not my favorite team in the world, being a Habs fan. But you know what? The Leafs have a very, very good roster, and there are quite a few players that you should definitely consider drafting in your upcoming fantasy drafts because they are very, very good players, and they're going to be a very, very good team, just like they have been for the past few years, except we're in the playoffs, guys, because you all know that they can't win a first-round series to save their lives. Anyway, let's jump into their projected lines that I'm projecting for this year. Now, the lines I imagine are going to be pretty similar to the lines last year. And the top line, I imagine, is going to be exactly the same with Michael Bunting, Auston Matthews, and Mitch Marner. On the second line, I currently have Nicholas Robertson, Alexander Kerfoot, and William Nylander because Tavares is going to miss at least the first 6 games of the season. So I imagine the line's going to look something like this. Nick Robertson's probably the guy with the most upside to put on that line. And the third line is the line that has been practicing together in Leafs practices. Yarncroke, David Kampf, and Nicolas Aube-Kubel. Jumping into the noteworthy players now, and first on the list is Auston Matthews, and it's no surprise here that he is their highest ADP player. He's one of the best players in the entire league. And honestly, guys, he could end up being the #1 guy in your fantasy leagues if he continues at that goal-scoring pace that he was at this year and scores 60 goals and actually plays a full 82 games. Oh boy, Auston Matthews could be super, super valuable. He actually had a higher point per game pace in most leagues than Connor McDavid last year just because of that super high goal scoring. Obviously, if goals and assists are worth the same in your league, obviously he's not going to be better than Connor McDavid. But in most leagues, goals are worth significantly more than assists. And that's why Auston Matthews is just so, so valuable. And that's why I have him as my #2 player in fantasy this year, just behind Connor McDavid. Then I have Mitch Marner, who last year scored 97 points in 72 games, playing alongside Auston Matthews in the top line and the top power play. And he is no support player in any way. He is an amazing player in his own right. Shot the puck 224 times last year, and is someone who's going to be super, super safe to draft at his ADP. I have him as the 14th best fantasy player, and his ADP is currently 18.1. I think he's pretty good value where he's being drafted. So definitely don't shy away from Marner if you have the chance to draft him, because right wing is a pretty rare position in today's fantasy leagues. So next I have Morgan Rielly, and he really, really impressed me with a career year last year, scoring 68 points. Absolutely fantastic. Now, while I don't expect him to have quite that good of a year this year, he's still going to have a really good year. Last year he had a 12.8 on-ice shooting percentage, so that's going to go down a little bit, which is why he's not going to quite hit 68 points this year. But I'm expecting another really solid year for Morgan Rielly. I have him as my #11th ranked defenseman in all of fantasy. If you haven't seen the video yet of my top 50 defensemen, you can check that out right up there. Now, I don't think he's going to finish that close to that ADP of 54. But the thing is, he's still one of the top defensemen, and you do generally have to reach for top defensemen in fantasy. Last year, he finished as the 85th best fantasy player in terms of fantasy points per game, so obviously a little bit off, and I do expect him to regress a little bit, so he's going to finish even a little bit below that. So remember, guys, you do generally have to reach for good defensemen in drafts. However, in that range, the same range as Letang and John Carlson are going, and those guys have much better peripheral stats than Morgan Rielly. One thing I do like about Morgan Rielly, though, is he is a very, very low injury risk and has only missed 1 game in his last 2 seasons. Then I have William Nylander, who's got the left wing, right wing eligibility this year, which is really, really nice. And last year scored 80 points in 81 games, so it's basically a point per game. And I don't think he's going to be quite a point per game this year, but I think he's going to be really, really good once again this season. A very safe draft pick at that current ADP. I have him as my 47th best forward, so that ADP basically agrees exactly where I have him ranked. One thing I do love about him, though, like I already mentioned, is that dual eligibility, left wing, right wing. Definitely someone who's super safe. You can move around your lineup a little bit. He's a good pick for me. Then I have John Tavares, who last year scored 76 points in 79 games. It was basically a point per game. This year I have him as my #39 best forward, although I might have to lower him a few spots because he is injured to start the year. Going to miss about the first 6 games or so, which is not too crazy there. Like, I'm not going to panic too much. I'm not going to drop him way down the draft board for that. But he's a pretty good ADP at his value anyway at 65.8. Just remember though that he is a natural center, so you don't want to draft too many of those in your draft because there are just so many natural centers this year that you're not going to be able to fit them all in your lineup if you want to draft them all. Next, I have goaltender Ilya Samsonov, currently going at an ADP of 116.6. He's going early, guys. A lot of people agree that he'll probably end up being Toronto's starter this season because of Matt Murray's inconsistency. Be that as it may, there's a very good chance that he will not be Toronto's starter. Murray could bounce back and have himself a really good year, and it could even be a 50-50 split with those two goalies. So Samsonov, while he is on a very, very good team, drafting him this early just seems really, really early to me, and he could even be a backup goalie if Murray plays really, really well. What if he is not that starter is the really big thing. Because of that, he's a really, really risky pick, and if he does end up being a backup, it's a huge waste of a pick this early in a draft. If you want a goalie in this ADP, Logan Thompson is going around the same ADP, and he's definitely going to be the starter in Vegas, and Vegas should be a pretty good team this year as well. Would much rather draft him at this ADP. Next, I have Michael Bunting, finished the 111th best fantasy player in terms of fantasy points per game last year. It was a very, very solid year last year, playing with Marner and Matthews, especially at the end of the season. He was just absolutely letting it up. It was absolutely fantastic. I'm expecting him to play alongside Marner and Matthews once again this season, like you saw in the lines. And this time he's going to play there the entire season, because last year he was bumped around a little bit on the second line, the third line, but finally he found his spot on that top line and it was absolutely fire. So I'm expecting some pretty good things from Bunting. I absolutely love him this year in fantasy. Just make sure you do have room for left wings, because there are quite a few left wings this year in fantasy. So don't draft too many of those either, but Bunting's definitely someone I do like this year in fantasy. All right, then we got Matt Murray, who's currently going at an ADP of 152.6. And at this ADP, it's definitely less risky than drafting Samsonov almost 40 spots earlier. Now, Matt Murray is not necessarily going to be the starter in Toronto, but he definitely will have just as much of a chance to become the starter as Samsonov will. And Murray, we all know, has won a couple of cups and obviously is a very talented goalie. If he can bounce back from those injuries, he could have himself a really solid year. And at this range, it's definitely more worth drafting him and taking the risk than drafting Samsonov 40 spots earlier. I'm still not super convinced in Matt Murray that he will be the starter, but at least the gamble is better at this range than it is 40 spots earlier. Next, I have Mark Giordano, and he's only 26% rostered right now and ended up finishing as the 216th best fantasy player in terms of fantasy points per game last year, which isn't particularly great, but let's remember, guys, that last year he played the majority of the season with the very, very bad Seattle Kraken. Now, if you look at just his stats with Toronto last year, he actually projected to be the 106th best fantasy player, and that's what he was in terms of fantasy points per game. And he actually projected just under Robert Thomas in leagues that have peripherals like hits and blocks. Now, obviously, this is fantastic, but it's a pretty small sample size. And his on-ice shooting percentage in Toronto was also insanely high at 15.2%. So that's definitely going to come back down to earth. And he's also getting older this year. He's actually going to turn 39 this season. So that being said, I could still see him finishing quite close to his ADP. So while he doesn't have that super explosive upside, he's a pretty safe pick, and he's only being drafted, like I said, guys, in 26% of leagues. So even if you already have your team drafted, but you don't like your defenseman that much, he could be available for you to pick up. And he's honestly, I think he's going to be a pretty decent player this year in fantasy. Then I have Alexander Kerfoot, who is slated to play on the second line with Nylander and Tavares, where he was playing most of the season last year. He scored 51 points in a full 82 games last year. Ended up as the 231st best player in terms of fantasy points per game. So he's not incredible, but he's definitely a safe player if you need someone in very, very deep drafts to fill out the bottom of your roster. The nice, really good thing about Alexander Kerfoot is that because Tavares is injured at the beginning of the year, Kerfoot is probably going to take that second line center role. And as of right now, he has left wing, right wing eligibility and no center eligibility. Now, if Tavares misses those 6 games like he's supposed to, Kerfoot will likely gain that center eligibility as well and become the first player this year to have a triple eligibility, which is super, super valuable for your fantasy teams because you can basically slot him in anywhere that you need it. Then I have Jake Muzzin, who last year only scored 14 goals in 47 games. Now, he had some serious injury concerns last year. There was some concussion concerns last year, and now there's a back injury he's dealing with. It's not something that I'm super high on. I'm not super high on his situation at all because there obviously is a lot of injury risk there. Now, if he is able to get over all those injuries, I'm expecting a little bit of a bounce back season. He's someone who does give you some pretty decent peripherals with hits and a little bit of blocks as well. And I definitely am expecting a little bit of a better offensive season from him as well. Would I draft him? Probably not. But if we get the season going and he's starting to play well and you're seeing him put up some solid peripherals and you're seeing him put up some points every now and then he's someone that I would consider grabbing in deeper leagues. Then I have Nick Robertson, who last year played 10 games, scored only a point, and that's it. Now, he's still considered a rookie this year. And if he does make the team and ends up getting to play on that second line like I have him with Kerfoot and Nylander, then he's someone I might take a look at for the first few games of the season. If Tavares comes back and he sticks on that line with Tavares and Nylander, then maybe I'll really consider him for a few more games until he drops off. But for now, I'm not interested in Nick Robertson because we don't know if he's going to make the team. And if he does, where is he actually going to end up playing? We're going to have to see. And that's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching all the way through. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, hit that subscribe button, and then hit that notification bell if you want notifications for all my preseason content. If you want to take your support to the next level, you can follow me on Patreon. The link is in the description below. Thanks so much, guys, and I'll catch you in the next episode of Fantasy Tipped.